Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it's just past midnight on Thursday, the 27th of March, at 2025. That makes this the news for March 26th, day 1127 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv. We're coming to you live from this major European capital that is currently under siege. Now, tonight is a very special live, for me anyway. Dr. K is here. And Dr. K, I'm going to try, let's see here, if I can figure this out. I probably can't. Your mic is muted, I believe,
No,
because
I'm
I
not saying
can't hear
anything.
you at all. Let's see. What does this do?
It's not saying.
That's not right.
Hello,
I
hello,
don't like that at all.
hello, hello, hello.
I wish I could blow you up. There's definitely a way to do that, but it only seems to give me those two choices, I'm afraid. Let me see here.
And you can't hear me, huh?
How's everybody doing tonight? All right. I'm afraid that we'll have to make do with that. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now, I can't hear you. So if you take a look at your little box, you should see a microphone icon. And you should be able to hit that just like you turned your camera on.
Yeah, it's on from my side, Peter. I wonder what's going on.
Can you? There you go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, it wasn't you. I had the volume all the way down on my phone.
What geniuses. Hi, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me. You know, it's a huge sacrifice for me to stay up this late.
I was just going to say I'm so deeply appreciative that you are putting yourself into this sleep deprived state to spend an hour with us. We all very much appreciate it. And so, everybody, this is Dr. K, who's a political scientist that analyzes how information is shared. And I've got a couple questions for her. And then once we've kind of gone through those questions, we'll open the floor and we'll take some questions from you guys. And so, Dr. K, do you want to take a minute here and introduce? I kind of gave your standard opening, but do
Yeah.
you want to take a minute and introduce yourself to everybody in whatever way you would like?
Yeah, Peter, give me a minute.
Ha 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 ha! Nice, very nice.
I am Dr. K. That stands for Dr. Carrie Oderman. I'm a political scientist. I wrote my dissertation on Eastern European small states and power disparities, and I I've been on social media for about 3 or 4 years, and I work a lot with a hands-on research method where I'm watching how algorithms work and how people are affected by the information they get on social media, especially political information. Peter was right when he said, my tagline is, I'm Dr. K, I'm a political scientist, and I look at how information is shared. And I'm really lucky I came up with that because that can mean so many things. And I really stretch that because I enjoy analyzing things. I'm a person too. I need a lot of sleep. I was joking around with Peter for a long time about whether or not I could stay up this late. He and I are in the same time zone. And I've got 2 kids. I'm gonna, it's probably breaking all the rules here, talking about personal things with all you crazy people on social media. Hey, from Sweden, hi Anne. What else, Peter? What do you think is interesting? What have I said before that you think I should repeat?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go immediately off script and derail the whole conversation because I've never heard before. I was unaware of what you had done your dissertation on. And when you tell me that you did your dissertation on power disparities in Eastern European countries, I immediately flash back to the trauma of the Zelensky meeting in the White House. You want to talk about power disparities and power plays. I mean, that's just the example writ large. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and that actually ties into a bigger topic that I'm working in terms of how our realities geopolitically are changing. And, this was a strong army what happened to Zelensky. And Zelensky is still on this mindset, like a lot of us are. A lot of analysts have to start reshuffling their deck about how they look at things because the world is certainly changing. And Zelensky pushed back, which I think was absolutely okay, but things have changed, and that was a setup for him, and that was a clear example of how things are moving a little bit backwards. Maybe I don't want to talk about polarity because I think like realpolitik and these things, the terms get thrown around and it gets overused. Just to make a long story short, we're moving back to the time where might is right, unfortunately, or we're backsliding to it, and people have to do everything they can to prevent this from happening. I actually, to go more into detail, I was looking at Eastern European small states. And that's really interesting because a lot of these smaller states, and the definition of that is between 4 and 6 million population, they can be bigger in terms of territory. And the thing about small states is they're really easy to manage. The larger a country gets, the more problems you have with just corruption and managing things efficiently and effectively. So small states are good little petri dishes to look at things. But a lot of international relations studies and literature had been done on this whole basis of might is right. So if you take that, then you have to ask yourself, if that's true, how come there even are small states? And for me, as a woman, this has a huge gender component to it too. And I also looked at that a lot of small countries have female leaders, and it's because they feel quite comfortable negotiating at a disadvantage because often women have, been subjected to this their life long, and they can apply these experiences to politics. I was at the Munich Security Conference, and after J.D. Vance had given that speech, there was a lot of shock with the European leaders. And I actually...
Now, Doc, can I just preface this by saying that to remind everybody, the Munich Security Conference, which was about a month ago, right? And you were there in person. And was that your first Munich Security Conference, or have you been before?
It was my first time.
Nice. Nice, right? I say nice because by all accounts, it was the most dramatic, pivotal Munich Security Conference since 1938, when Chamberlain gave away Central Europe to Hitler. Now,
apples and oranges, right? The Munich Agreement was not the Munich Security Conference. I think people at the Security Conference would take exception to that. It happened in Munich though, and a lot of those connections have been made. Probably the Munich Security Conference just celebrated the 61st anniversary. So
okay.
If I'm going to say it was probably in the recent history, probably 2007, when Putin gave the speech that basically told everyone what he was going to do, and nobody believed it. And there's been a lot of disbelief in Europe. So when J.D. Vance came in and, cleaned house and told everyone his opinion about things and talked about Europe's problem with democracy, et cetera, there was a lot of shock. And this is when Europeans really realized that they were going to have to start rethinking their security commitments. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting were the Europeans being so upset at the fact that negotiations would happen with them with no chair at the table. And I had looked at some of these people, and when I say people, it's a lot of men there. And I just said, this is a real teachable moment. A lot of your female colleagues have been experiencing just this for their entire lives. How does it feel?
Being sidelined, being made irrelevant.
Having at the table, having negotiations happen without them. And I got some really odd looks about that. But, that was just a little side story about how when you negotiate at a disadvantage, you have to figure out different types of leverage. And I watch these things, how countries that are at a structural disadvantage, have less resources, manage to negotiate. And those rules apply to whatever kind of political system you're in. You got to make yourself valuable somehow. You got to have like something you stand for. Switzerland, of course, has the geographic things that keep it safe. But small states can punch above their weight, but they have to have the right mindset and know-how. In the past, during the Cold War, a lot of countries used diplomatic protocol to their advantage. You can leverage off of that. The Baltic states, when they first got invited to the White House, that was a big deal. Things like that, a state visit. So I'm watching for these things to start reoccurring also in this new political environment because everything's getting reshuffled.
But you can only leverage the kind of diplomatic process if it's respected on the other end. If the other end are a bunch of thugs who are going to tell you, might is right, how do you manage that?
Well, that kind of, can we swear? Because that kind of stuff comes back to bite people in the ass eventually. This kind of disrespect for diplomatic protocol, which, really goes back to the 12th or the 15th century. I recently moved and I actually lost a lot of books in my move, but I think that I've got diplomatic history back here, I've got diplomatic protocol, and that's just like in any situation, you know how to act then, right? And by changing the rules or making it so people don't know how you're going to act in things, it makes things a lot more difficult. It ruins your credibility, and that we've seen. Now, there can be people that come in and say, I'm a disruptor. I'm going to do this one way or the other. And I think Steve Witkoff is a good example of this, right? I mean, we just saw him be relatively successful. Is it Witkoff or Wyckoff? The one that's negotiating in Russia right now.
Everybody here says Vikov, so I can't tell you.
One of those things where he did really well with the negotiations in Israel. And I did a piece on that on TikTok where he did a really person-centered negotiation, which worked really well there. And I think that Ukraine was very observant, and they then wanted to do the same type of thing by making prisoners of war, and especially those 20 to 700,000 young people that are missing from the country. And they thought that was going to work. Ukraine did, because by making it people focused, then it wouldn't be about pushing lines on a map. And, we got kind of schooled now in Moscow. He's parroting a lot of Putin's talking points, and a clever person, a clever diplomat wouldn't let that happen to them. And I mean, we saw this also with Gordon Sondland, right? In 2019, when he did the whole quid pro quo thing, and he was a businessman too. So this idea that people coming in from the outside of government service and diplomacy and shaking things up, that doesn't always work well.
As I understand it, the way that Witkoff went from being the Middle East envoy to being the key negotiator with Russia was that the Russians said, General Kellogg knows too much about us. We don't want to deal with him. Send us this naive businessman that we can say whatever we want to and he'll go along with it. And it certainly seems as though that is what happened.
Well, it seems pretty plausible. The whole focus on Putin praying after Trump was injured, and to me, it seemed pretty transparent. Those were the things that you would say, and also, there's a certain arrogance with people that have been very successful in terms of not thinking they can be fooled. And I'm sure, this has been discussed at length that he's been fooled by Putin. Putin knew exactly which buttons to push and what to say. And I mean,
And it really, sorry, go ahead.
A delay, but I was going to say that one thing that drives me crazy is this idea that Russia is such a pious, religious country. And when less than 20% are churchgoers, if you would look at a comparison between Russia and Ukraine, I want to say between 40 and 60% of Ukraine regularly attend some type of religious service. And in Russia, that's not the case, but that's always being used as a way to show this cultural connection between the United States and Russia lately. And it's not true.
I mean, I'm sorry that the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is a former KGB agent. That's not a church. That's an extension of the state with the intention of controlling the population, is what it looks like to me.
Well, religion's always been a factor for control, and some things in Russia have been really optimized, and I agree with you on that.
Have been really optimized. That's a beautiful way. That's a really beautiful way to put it. On the subject of the Munich Security Council, am I overstating things when I say that all expectations for that meeting were absolutely shattered? That what we really saw at that meeting was a moment that redefined the very nature of the American-European relationship, in which Europe could no longer depend on its security from the United States.
Yeah, I think you can. That's really a fair assessment. There's a term in psychology when something happens and the reality changes, and it's usually from a traumatic experience. And I would describe it as something like that. I'm trying to find this because this is something that I'm actually doing a piece on right now. I've got my laptop open here because sometimes I work too, and it's about the reframing of how we have to see the world right now. Okay, it's called the shattered assumptions theory, and shattered assumptions theory, and it's kind of dangerous to see an overlap between psychology and political science and things like that, but I think this really, really fits well because what happens when all of your assumptions are shattered is first you have a little bit of a shutdown, and then you try to renegotiate the new reality. And that saying, you don't know what you don't know. I find myself even really having some cognitive dissonance because I'm constantly using the tools I have always used to understand situations, and then having to remind myself, no, things have changed. You can't make these assumptions. And I think that people that are just coming into the topic of politics or global affairs actually might have an advantage to me, right? Because they don't have this baggage of okay, well, we'll do this, and I'll give you an example. I was recently in Dubai, and completely different form of government than I'm used to. And usually when I go someplace, I will do a quick analysis of, what's going on here, trying to figure out the country. One of the things I do, I look at the form of government, the elections, how many people participate in votes, what's the voter turnout like, what's the competition like, how many political parties do they have. And I did all of these, I was going to do all of these things, and then I realized people don't vote here. No political parties.
It's a monarchy, isn't it?
Yeah. People don't talk about politics there much either. And it was for me thinking, okay, you won't be able to understand this country using the tools that you use to understand other countries. And this is going to happen to us more and more often. because the people and the world is changing, who we consider allies is also going to change. We're seeing that right now in Turkey, and about how the European Union was always putting Turkey on hold for being a member of the EU because there are problems with its democracy. Well, Turkey's looking pretty good right now in terms of alliances. I had no idea that Turkey has such a huge land military. They've got 400,000 troops, and then they've got twice that in reserve. So we're looking at 800,000 potential soldiers ready to go. They've got naval bases in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Plus, they make drones, but they also make 155 millimeter shells, a lot of them. And this makes them someone you want on your team. So even people, we're going to have to lower our standards and not be so picky about what team we're on. And, you got to look at how the U.S. in 1941 became allies with Russia, right? Or was it 42? When they joined the war.
Yeah.
Nobody saw
the
that.
Germans invaded in 41.
So,
No, 42. Because Stalin died in 53.
So what's the bridge there? And you're like, 9 years or whatever, like
12. So 41. 41, sorry. So
people wouldn't have expected in peace times an alliance like that to happen. But when and this is the sign that people are finally starting to take the threat from Russia seriously. But Russia's been playing the long game. The Kremlin, and I like to just say the Kremlin, because regardless of who is in power and what the system is called, the Kremlin's been there. And they've been working on weakening the NATO alliance, weakening the EU, weakening lots of other multilateral organizations for years now. And there's cracks in them. And right now people are questioning if NATO would even work, that type of thing. So these alliances that I call loosey-goosey alliances, I'm Midwestern, so I can do that. This means that people are going to have to work together with countries that they might not have been partners with in the past. And it's going to be really problematic in liberal democratic societies, because people that have always led good lives think it's really hard to make compromises. And
so,
go ahead.
So can I ask, on the subject of shattering preconceptions or just living in a bubble of preconceptions, when I think about the way that this war has proceeded and the kind of drip, drip, drip of Western support for Ukraine, I have often complained, as listeners to this channel will attest, that one of the problems that we have is that the entire established diplomatic corps that came up during the Cold War and the post-Soviet era saw the Russians as a critical partner in the world, somebody that you had to deal with. And I wonder if the slow walking of aid to Ukraine has been influenced by this inflated opinion that much of the established diplomatic corps has when it comes to what Russia is and what influence they have in the world.
I think it would depend on the diplomatic corps. You've got some situations like in Germany. I studied diplomatic protocol, but a long time ago, and Germany might have changed some of their rules. But at the time, the German diplomatic corps was heavily influenced 15, 20 years ago with former, what's the word for it in English? Former members of royal families, former members of people that were titled, and which no longer exists in Germany anymore. But if you have a von in front of your name, people 2 + 2 = 4 there. And
I'm sorry, is the word you're looking for aristocracy?
Yes, thank you. God, my username is Karistocracy.
Yes, I know. That's why that's so fucking funny.
It's like an elder moment, okay? And you would see these long family traditions of this. So there may have been an aristocracy, whether it be Russian, German, whatever. There were close connections, so there could have been a little bit of a tolerance in that. There are other countries like the U.S. that they have a pay to play model when it comes to some diplomatic work, to be an ambassador, things like that. So I don't know if you can make big sweeping observations about things. I do think that economics and financial incentives played a huge role in how serious it was, how the thing was handled. I recently heard someone said, people don't like to use the word fascism because that means they have to do something about it. And I think that
It does mean that, and that's exactly why we should be using that word.
exactly, but if you call a spade, and this is the kind of the same thing I think that happened with Russia, right? There was this unwillingness to really acknowledge, first of all, any threat from Russia. And I mean, hey, I got caught on my back foot too, right? I was in Kyiv, right? I had to drive out quick because we never thought that Russia would invade, and all of those things, and it really ruined a nice weekend. And
It really ruined a nice weekend.
I hate to do it. I know that you have a lot of people that are in Ukraine right now, and I mean that with absolutely the most respect. I mean,
I know.
I left. I know you're there, but it's like either you laugh or you cry, right? So there was that reluctance in Europe to say, "Oh, holy shit, this is really bad aggression," right? And there were some rumors in the first couple of days that people were like, "Well, let's see how this plays out," right? We don't want to put back the wrong horse, so to speak. And when it became clear that Ukraine really did have a chance, there was an uptick in support. But the issue really in Europe to do something in one unified thing was the threat perception, right? Of course, Eastern European countries, historically, they're like, guys, this is not going to be good. And everyone's like, oh, just relax. It's the end of history. It's going to be fine. Blip, just a blip. It's going to be fine. And it's going, and you're going to have to call it what it is soon. And that's what the Munich Security Conference really did force people to do, right? Because they know if it is what it is, and you're not prepared for it because you're not spending 3% on security for NATO, among other things, then people can see the writing on the wall. And I want to point out also with this whole 3% story that it's not just spending 3% of your GDP. It's of that 3%, if you're investing it really to be battle ready. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. It's like you can spend 3% of your GDP on your military, but if you're building really nice cafeterias and setting up awesome pensions and making really sharp uniforms, that's not going to necessarily mean you're battle ready. So NATO has guidelines, and if you Google it, you can find a nice graphic about how many countries are really spending that 3% and how much of that 3% is really going to get people ready in case things get kinetic. Dr. K is really good. Thank you so much. At night, someone Nightshade 66. Dr. K is also Catholic, so 666 is like, that's kind of scary.
So let me ask you, we started the conversation by talking about the fact that you were at the Munich Security Conference and that the Munich Security Conference was potentially a defining moment for maybe the next few decades, right? And what was it like being there in person with a guest list that is never publicized because there are so many heads of state and heads of defense departments, et cetera, there that there's security for the security conference.
Yeah,
And
I'm looking if I have my badge somewhere. I kept it. Not only was I there, but I was given full access. So I it was amazing. And it was based on the work I do on social media, educating people about global affairs and politics and security. And it truly was a highlight for me. The thing about the MSC is if you're there, everyone assumes that you're on eye level. And I had some of the most amazing conversations with people I really admire. But there's just an understanding, kind of, the Chatham House rule where you don't like name names. Of course, like Sanna Marin, I'm a huge fan of hers. I got to talk to her for a long time. Got a selfie with her. Carl Bildt, Carl Bildt has a great memory, okay? Because in January 2022, the BBC came to Kyiv and they filmed an episode of one of their shows about global politics live. And Bildt was on stage, and he's kind of my political crush, okay? If he's, when I was studying, it was things that he wrote that I was like, wow. So I was given the opportunity to ask a question, and when the event was over, I'm walking out to the exit. He's walking out with the Swedish ambassador. They're going to get in a Volvo, right? And we had a little chat, okay? Fast forward to the MSC, somebody introduces me to him, and he goes, "Oh, I know Carrie." Carl. I ended up sitting down and talking with him. I'm a fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, and because of that, we had this commonality, and I joined them for an informal meeting, and we talked about what people were experiencing after the Banff speech, and because I have no basis for comparison, I can just tell you that people were just like, and that. I know that doesn't happen every year, but there was no way that I could say, the hum I heard in the hallways or anything like this was different. But there definitely was a hum.
Let me.
Wait, Daniela, are you Latvian? Is a Latvian flag if you say you love Dr. K? I lived in Riga for a year, did a Fulbright there, big fan, love Latvia.
And let's not forget that the Baltic states by GDP contribute more to the defense of Ukraine than any other nations on earth. And so we are always grateful to have the Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians here.
You don't mess with the Baltics though, Peter. There are guys called Forest Brothers that refuse to accept that World War II was over until the 1950s. They'd be like, "Oh, the war's over? Oh, we're just going to keep doing our partisan stuff." So, I mean, you don't mess with the Balts. They commit.
They commit. That's good to know. I'm looking forward to one day searching for amber on a beach in Latvia. I think that's where the amber is, isn't it?
It's all along the Baltic Sea coast. I always feel cheated. I never find it, but can you remember the little video I did? I had a little beret on, and you're like, "Oh, Dr. K, you're so cute." That was on the Baltic coast. That was on the German side. There's supposed to be amber there too, right? Never find it. Never find it.
Right on. So let me ask you, because you did a video this week that was really very eye-opening to me. I often say that the only real resource that a nation has is its people. And they're the most valuable resource that any nation has. And when we look at Russia, we see them literally just disposing of people haphazardly in a desperate attempt to secure land that is not their own. And that's in stark contrast to the Ukrainians, like we just saw in Kursk, right, where they traded land for lives. The supply lines were cut, people were in trouble, they backed right out. You published sorry, go ahead.
Whenever I hear that, I think of Ilovaisk, right? I think of what happened. I think it was in 2014. We have anyone familiar with it? Pop it into the chat. Anytime people are trading with the Russians, I think of the situation that happened at Ilovaisk, where there was supposed to be a humanitarian corridor, and those guys just got mowed down. And Yeah, but yeah, you're right.
Well, they
It's
did that. They did that in Mariupol too, on at least three separate occasions. They claimed to be opening humanitarian corridors, and then they strafed everybody that tried to get out.
I know I
I
covered the
mean,
Russian news, but did you see CNN saying Kherson residents claim they're being hunted? And it's like, look at the guy on the roof. You're
thank
not
you.
claiming anything. It's happening.
And it's been happening for months. And as I understand it, I mean, the view that we're getting into that behavior is that the residents of Kherson are nearby to the front line. They're within FPV drone range because the Dnipro separates them from the Russians. And so they're bringing new drone operators to the left bank in order to train them on the use of FPV drones in an urban setting hunting civilians.
Well, I mean, they did that with snipers too in Lugansk and Donbass too. I mean, we know that. We
Oh,
know
did
that.
they?
Yeah, I covered that when I was working at UATV, and it was kind of like to get your final sniper test, you'd have to they take the guys out there. So it's interesting because a lot of these things are not that new. They just keep going. Someone just pointed out that's not a Latvian flag; it's an Austrian flag. I had this last moment, so um, let me be.
Don't get me started on the Austrians. But I want to go back to this one of your recent videos. You talked about a human centered approach.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that when it came to the ceasefire, what the Ukrainians were looking for was to get their POWs back, get their stolen children back, get their captured civilians back. And do you want to take a minute and talk about what we can learn from that distinction in approach and what the benefits of that approach are?
Well, first of all, the, the human value is there. And we've seen again and again that that's important in Ukraine. So I want to be very careful and say that it was not a calculated move by the Zelensky administration. However, considering the fact that Wyckoff had just been in Israel and was negotiating and had really used this human-centered approach, it it was very good that Ukraine also prioritized people. And the thing about prioritizing people is it really disarms the people and it takes away leverage from, well, in this case, from Russia took away leverage in several ways. First of all, we know about the International Court of Justice and the arrest warrant for Putin because of the children. And by him having to hand the children over or negotiate with this, it's an acknowledgement of that. First of all, okay, not a good thing for him. Then you have the situation where they're pushing for territory. They're pushing for territory. And it was by making it a human-centered approach, it would not have been appropriate to push for territory in that moment. What was Russia going to say? Okay, we got these people, and we're going to trade it for land. No, people are traded for people, and so that also took some leverage away from them. And it is was a very good and intelligent thing. And the ball was really then put back into the Kremlin's court. And something I am concerned about, though, is I'm sure you guys have seen some of the early news reports that the U.S. and Russia are talking about the restart of Nord Stream 2 as part of negotiations. And, you know, this whole stupid signal chat thing.
Sorry. But I laugh every time I think about it.
It's a really good distraction, isn't it?
Mm.
It's a really good distraction. Now, I'm not saying that the Trump administration is propaganda, you know, hybrid war mastermind. But it only takes one person in the chat to use the Steve Bannon technique of, like, what is it called? Flooding things with information. This scandal was big enough. This was like a Kardashian level thing to get everyone distracted. And not everyone has to be in on it. It's an embarrassment. No one, but all you have to do is add the phone number of one guy from the Atlantic, and the story breaks, and no one's talking about how the U.S. is talking about opening up Nord Stream again. So Europe can use Russian gas, which means Russia will then have some of the money it needs very badly right now. Russia isn't been hurting as bad as we'd like because of the sanctions, but they're running out of money. And one of the reasons that they need to negotiate now is because of that 6 to 8 months left. So if we would just kind of let things go a little bit longer, then they would have to negotiate.
So I know a little bit about that. One of the things that the Russians have been doing, and followers of this channel are aware of this, is that to pay for the war and the budget shortfalls, they've been dipping into the sovereign wealth fund, right? Putin put away a bunch of liquid assets, Chinese yuan and gold, to the tune at its height in July of 2023, or I'm sorry, 2022, it was valued at about $120 billion. Today, there is about $35 billion in liquid assets in the sovereign wealth fund. And that number is in rapid decline. They are so concerned about a cash shortfall inside of Russia right now that the several $billion worth of private Western business that had been nationalized, including companies like the Danish brewing company Jarlsberg Beer, French food manufacturer Danone, and Juniper. What's that?
Danone was already nationalized?
Oh, yeah, Danone was nationalized about a year ago, Kara, if I'm not mistaken. And
This Eisen thing that's going on right now, did you catch that in the news?
the which?
Yeah, the Raiffeisen Bank, apparently just before the war broke out, they literally brought truckloads of cash to Russia. And I mean, now they've been nationalized too, and a lot of their shareholders are a little bit upset, right? Shout out to Daniela in Austria. Raiffeisen is Austrian based.
Well, my understanding is that those companies that have been nationalized, they are now trying to sell shares of them in order to raise cash because they are so cash poor. So they're looking for the oligarchs to come in and give a cash infusion, pennies on the dollar for chunks of what's left of Danone and Carlsberg, etc. The real money, of course, is in the Juniper and Forsum assets, those power plants.
How history repeats itself too. The oligarchs come in, get cheap shares, get to, for the next couple generations also have control of things. I mean, if you're playing
that's Trump's plan in the United States, right? That's why the stock market is tanking, so that he can concentrate wealth in the hands of his oligarch buddies.
That's nuts, isn't it? And at what cost? That's for me just.
It's a different world, preconceptions.
Yeah.
All right, listen, we are down to so first of all, I got to thank Leo Ring, who is the sponsor of tonight's live, and I got to thank Dr. K for all of her time and her consideration. And we've got just 15 minutes left, so I want to give this time to the attendees here, and I want to open the floor for questions. We have someone I consider to be a brilliant mind in the world today, and we should take advantage of that. So for anybody, oh, hey, big spender, that's worth a tenth of a penny. Oh, Dr. K, do you think Trump is compromised by Putin? Tell us honestly.
We should just do like a yes/no fire. Yes, I do. I've spoken with people, and not people that have evidence or anything like that, but there's something compromising. Or it could just be a shared goal. The scary thing is what, after everything we know, could be compromising. It's I'm kind of a nerdy, clean cut woman. I can't even imagine, right? I think
So, so
yeah.
Doc, can I? So I have this crazy conspiracy theory that I have never heard anyone else ever discuss. I have never heard anyone bring this up. So, and I have tossed it out a couple times here with the guys. So let me toss it out to you. Donald Trump had a bunch of shit at Mar-a-Lago, right? A bunch of state secrets, nuclear secrets. We know that. That's a fact. Donald Trump was paid an unknown amount of money to host the Saudi golf tournament at his place. At the time that all of those unfettered documents were in the toilet, Mohammed bin Salman's people were there. We know that Mohammed bin Salman is an acolyte to Putin. Is there any reason for me to think that, gosh, maybe the Saudis were at the copy machine the whole 6 days they were there? And why has nobody ever even breathed a word of, am I crazy?
No, you're not crazy, but why would it just be the Saudis then? I mean, think of all the other official guests that come in and out of Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, I'm
And
not suggesting that it was just the Saudis. I'm saying we know the Saudis were there, and we know that they were there at the time of the documents. That's something we know.
um, I have a lot of conversations that go like, are they that smart or are they that stupid? And um, and my biggest fear is they're that stupid and someone's in the background that is that smart. Um, so yeah, but I don't see Saudi Arabia risking that though. I don't. I don't.
No?
I think it's possible, and it's a conclusion that like I would have came to. I was hoping you would say something about aliens, but I come on, it's that or werewolf romance novels for me, right? Like everyone's got to have like to wind down on.
Mhm.
Yeah, it could be like and just like I was throwing out my conspiracy theory that the whole signal chat thing is a distraction too. It would make sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard anybody else say that.
Yeah, because
But,
I'm always so cutting edge, right? Like pattern recognition.
well, it does. I mean, it has driven me mad, wondering how could Mike Waltz have possibly put the guy from the Atlantic on there? I can't. Is it Jeff? Is his first name Jeff Goldberg? JG anyway.
Yeah.
JG anyway. How could he possibly have put the guy from the Atlantic on that chat without knowing it?
You had your volume off on your phone and you didn't realize it.
Oh, that's a fair point. Fair
I
point.
sent, I sent a picture of my cat after she was neutered in one of those cute like bodies to a Ukrainian politician over WhatsApp accidentally because I was going to send it to somebody else. I had a really bad streak of sending stupid stuff accidentally to people. So
That's funny.
it's possible. It's possible. So, I mean, they're supposed to be using secure phones. They are. And this whole discussion, is it treason for being stupid? I don't know. But I put a tweet out. I have Twitter people. No one's on my Twitter. But my big meaningful statement of the day is if you don't get the job because you're competent, you're not going to get fired because you're incompetent. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a confederacy of the incompetents. Um, Bobby's got a question here. Dr. K, who do you like in Europe for supporting Ukraine? Who can Ukraine count on? Macron, Starmer, who else?
Poland.
Poland.
Poland really has to start taking on a leadership role. I would like to see Poland and Turkey work together. They don't classically have like a super like historical bond or anything that you could get. Lots of tourism between Turkey and Poland, but I can see Poland's got the skin in the game and Turkey's got the muscle, and I think that two countries that are really into religion could maybe find some type of common ground.
Without it resulting in a crusade or a jihad?
I'm just saying they can agree sometimes on how they treat women. Okay. I mean,
Oh, really? Really? That's where you're going with
no,
that?
that was not
That's
my
very
intention.
worrisome to me, Doc.
No,
Very
Poland,
worrisome indeed.
Poland does not deserve that, though. I mean, I have watched how Poland has stepped up, and I have seen some concerning things. A lot of the goods going through to Ukraine, were taxed by the Polish, and they have been sending a lot of money, but they did also end up getting a lot of money from EU goods being pushed through to Ukraine. A lot of people don't know about that. How far?
Now,
Wait, how far
now,
apart is Poland? Pretty far. There's a couple countries that are loosey goosey in between.
now, somebody did mention about the Polish border blockades, right? And those blockades were principally led by agricultural interests inside of Poland. And there was a legitimate, in my opinion, there was a legitimate concern from Polish farmers in
Yeah.
as much as Ukrainian grain was far less expensive on the Polish market. However, the response from the Poles, given that Russian grain was pouring across the Belarusian border and nobody was protesting over there were a lot of voices that raised concerns that there may have been some Russian influence in those operations. Do you have any knowledge about that? Do you have any thoughts on any of that, the Polish border blockades?
First of all, I think that um, the agriculture industry is so important, and you don't mess with farmers, right? You don't mess with their livelihood. Um, it's the farm boys in any situation and girls that protect countries, right? If you think about people with pitchforks and things like that, it's important, and it is the backbone of most economies still, and that was justified. At the same time, um, I have heard that some of those protests, there were foreign actors involved. Yeah, I've heard that, but that should not take away from the fact that farmers work really hard and keep societies going, and they were justified in that. They should have. We got to learn from this guy, and we got to find better solutions for making sure the world gets fed. But it's not going to help anybody if people are starving in Africa right now and then start migrating every way they can through Turkey, through Eastern Europe, or they get flown to Minsk and then get pushed over the border too. So
But but we know, right? Putin threatened what I call the three F's when he started this war. He threatened nukes, fission. He threatened the fuel; everybody would freeze in their beds, and he threatened famine, right, by cutting off the food supply. The three F's. And he's been hitting the port of Odessa, burning hundreds of tons of grain every month. And somebody asked about the Black Sea ceasefire. What do we think of that? And you want to lead it off? Go ahead.
I don't know. Do you think it's going to work? I mean,
It's already failed. He hit Nikopol tonight.
well, I guess we have the answer to that, right? But
I mean, come on.
this has got to be independently confirmed, right? The amount of patience people in Ukraine have to have with this independent confirmation. When I think of the Novakakova Dam, I mean, even when the first reports came out and I was doing news aggregation, I said, reports are coming in that, this could have been a Russian thing. And, um, it's something, you walk a fine line, but I think you also have to be smart enough to see continuous patterns, right? I mean,
And yet we hear from the administration this seeming confidence in taking Putin at his word, it echoes. There's a haunting echo of the naivety of George Bush Jr. W back in like 2001, 2002, when he first met Putin, and he was wearing his grandmother's crucifix, and Bush looked into his eyes and saw his soul. I mean, is it really that easy to deceive the president of the United States and sucker them in?
Yeah, I would say for Vladimir Putin it is.
All right, other questions. We have about 4 minutes left, guys. Other questions for Dr. K?
I like all the people that are agreeing with us. That's amazing.
Well, that's because I've blocked everyone who doesn't. I'm really pushing the limits of the blocked list.
People listening to this. This is great. Gosh.
120.
Oh,
Russian involvement in Mexico. Gosh, I don't know anything about Russians in Mexico.
Stuff about that. Okay, if you look at border crossings, where I had a tough time really, because there is a different system, there is no system of registering people in the United States. And this goes back to history, the Constitution, all of these things. When you cross the border in Mexico, at least in the past, you've been pretty much, pinky promised that when you got your final destination, you would go through the process of, getting your papers in order. And there was a huge uptick in both Chinese and Russian people crossing the border starting in 2022. And there is a lot of influence there. When I travel, and I travel around Egypt, Turkey, the Emirates, there's a lot of Russians there too. But there is really a concentrated amount of Russians in Mexico. Some of them did cross the border illegally and now are illegally in the United States. Now, if there are people that just wanted to have nothing to do anymore with the Kremlin and their politics, it's one thing. If it's a fifth column, they don't know. But this idea that closing the border is only affecting people from South America is not true. I think there's over 20,000 Chinese that came in 2022 or 2023 also. 20,000.
Across the Mexico border?
If someone feels like Googling it and correcting me, I like to err on the side of caution when I make those estimates, but I want to say it was around 20,000. I heard about the dead soldiers, the 4 dead soldiers on the Belarusian border. Have you been following that? Like, I know they
found them dead. I only knew they were missing.
Well, they were in their tracked vehicle, and it looked like they had got caught in a swamp. That seems pretty tough. I mean, that's no way to go. And I don't know why you don't get out of the hatch. I don't know where the hatch was on the vehicle they were driving, though, right? If it's bogged down, and they should have GPS on those things. Crazy conspiracy theories. You can paint what you want there. It would be a lot easier for the United States to call it an accident too if it wasn't, because like I said, if it's fascism, you got to do something about it. If soldiers die because of an outside force, you got to do something about it.
No, I hadn't heard that they'd been found, and I certainly hadn't heard that they'd been found dead. Okay, listen, it's late, right? And you've done great. Good job. I just want one final thought. Jeff wants to know what you think. Do you honestly think anything short of Russian defeat can give Ukraine long-term peace?
It depends on what long-term is. You can't move Ukraine away from Russia. I don't think anyone in the rest of the world is interested in crushing Russia or have the resources to, retrain Russia to do anything else. I think what we really have to look at is how to, in the long term, really keep a buffer zone and, mind the hell out of it. Like, guys, I know you're tired, right? And I don't want you guys to lose this war. It's my war too, right? Like, I had to leave my house. But let's look at what's realistic. Get the kids back, get the POWs back. Don't get peacekeepers. Peacekeepers don't do jack shit. Sorry. If you get a force in there that's obligated to protect that and maintain the border that's agreed upon, and you got to mind the hell out of it. You really do. Dragon's teeth and everything. But and this is just me armchair quarterback, right? Or armchair generally. And it's not something I normally do, but and of course you got to get everyone that doesn't want to be Russian out of any area that the Russians are. And security guarantee, right? Yeah, you don't agree to anything unless you say, and how is that going to be enforced?
But of course, that's the very thing that the United States government will not provide under this administration.
I also did a piece on maybe it wasn't that bad that Trump wanted the rare earth metals because he'd had to get them somehow then, right? Apparently the deal wasn't that great for Ukraine. So it's just, we got to rethink, where's the leverage? What can the Ukrainians use? Why is it in everybody's interest? And it's tough. It's been a long time. Peter, how long have you been there?
I've been in Ukraine for 2 years and 1 month.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just hear Jeff is saying like the North and South Korean border. It's not an optimal situation. It's not. That is not an optimal situation. But I think it would. If you can't get Russia to stop, you guys need a breather in Ukraine, right? 15.
Say that again. I missed that last bit.
You need a breather at least, right? So if you put like a hard border between you, they're gonna keep building anyhow. They're gonna keep getting ready for the next hit. And you just have to make sure you do too. It's a sad reality. Maybe someday, and now it's late, so I'm gonna get, maybe someday civil society in Ukraine, in Russia is gonna get some balls and gonna stand up. And maybe someone's gonna poison somebody. Maybe someone's gonna fall. Maybe the right person's gonna fall out of a window. It sounds like terrible. It's not really who I am as a person, but these things happen and they're effective. And that might be what needs to happen. The thing is, you don't know who's going to come after Putin leaves, right? You don't know.
I keep waiting for that black swan to fly over the horizon.
Yeah, but he's killed all those. He's killed all the baby swans. Okay, there's no one there to challenge him. I don't know. He just had an oxygen chamber at night, and he just.
And he's bathing in that deer blood, right? Love the deer antler blood. Ugh, God, this fucking guy.
He's gonna live longer than you and I are.
Well, me, that's probably true.
Oh, come on, this year. You know this.
All right, listen, you are the best. It was such a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you. Everybody thank Dr. K, please. And thanks everybody for joining us for this conversation. Thanks to Leo Ring, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. Thanks to Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces. Thanks to Lars, who has the Discord server. And thanks to Jay and Travis, the best moderator team on the Tickety Talk. Final thoughts, Doc?
You have a team? You get sponsored? This is amazing.
Oh, we're the best.
Oh my gosh, we should do.
How do you think we got you? How do you think we got you?
You asked me, Peter. You asked me. That was it. That was all it takes. People don't realize that I'm like, okay, yeah.
Do you ever go live? I never see you live.
I used to go live on COVID nights in Kyiv with a red wine, and I'd get a little bit silly. But then after the war started, it just didn't seem. It didn't have it in me. I'll go. I've done lives with the Geo Hussar, with you. Other people ask me for lives, I'll do that. But just, to have this whole intellectual download when you're alone in a room, kind of weird for me. My husband used to watch my lives to make sure somebody was watching them. He'd watch them from the next room.
Aw, that's a good guy right there. All right. Hey, there's Leo Ring, sponsor of tonight's live. Thank you, Leo.
Oh, Leo, thank you very much for sponsoring. I'm Dr. K. I'm here with Peter, and thank you for supporting Peter and his work in Ukraine. It's really, really important. That was my TV voice.
Thanks, Doc.
Okay, I'm going to go to bed, guys. And now
Me
I'm
too.
going to cut this off without like, with really shutting it off so I don't do something embarrassing, right? So I don't take it to the bathroom while I'm brushing my teeth. Bye, everyone. Stay safe, okay?
Good night.
Bye, Peter.